Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Artist Circle, Imogen Heap, The Listener Chair. The Listening Chair. Originally suggested for Childhood Nostalgia Week, an autobiographical song where each minute of the song represents 7 minutes of her life, written when she was 35. So that's why it's 5 minutes long. Okay. Interesting concept. Let's dive into it and see what's going on.
Blue piano are just some of the things I like. So the more that I see of them in my day, the better I sleep at night. Mum, Dad, Jazz, Juliet are just some of the people I love. So the more of all them I can get in my day, the better I'll sleep at night. I can moonwalk, build castles, play ping pong, talk to animals, hold my breath for a long time and tell the future. I'll just six of the things I can do, and the more I can fit of these things in my day, the better I sleep at night. The better I sleep at night. Composer, or maybe an astronaut. This is what I'm gonna be when I grow up. I know 'cause I sing out all through the day. I fly through space by night. Teasing.
So it's really interesting. It's in 6/8, but the emphasized beats change with every segment.
I put a brave face on, battle through the day, but I might cry myself to sleep. Pinch, dancing around the car park after lunch, catching cats, ghost cola cubes, forgive moms, shy type, show off your mum's good and so what? Swap status, best friends night, ride a watch, tell the time again, the culture left, there all the pretty girls, so tell the there, sisters, in school, he's cool, our brother knows karate.
The harmonies are interesting too.
To make you hate me so much. Is it the clothes
We have mode shifts as well.
Wonder bra thrown round the German classroom. You wouldn't understand. I'll never live it down. Hiding in the bushes or tiptoeing down the corridors.
Interesting. It sounds like this section has heavy reverb, but I think it's still all a cappella.
Somehow I'll get through. I never want this to end. This night, this music, with you in my arms. Switch into the real world. No idea what I'm doing. And here it goes. Here she goes. I found a place, feels like home, but I caught you kissing her, so suddenly I'm on my own. There's just not enough hours in the day, but things are going great, can't complain.
Oh, we've actually shifted to a 5. When did that happen? That's right now, right?
Gazing out the window for no reason. Why did I stop eating bread? Cheese. I love cheese.
And a shift to 4 now.
I want to have children. But I don't want to have children. You know? Something niggling, feeling I can't quite explain. Online, offline, like I'm not really him. Awake or sleeping, somehow I can't tell the difference. Twilight, outside, dark deep down within. It's a cover up, it was a cover up operation all along. Honing in, I'm honing in on the heart of it all. Toughen up, I've gotta toughen up, cause I'm breaking it all apart. What's at the heart, what's at the heart of it all? Who am I now?
Okay. That's that's pretty powerful. So, as Artist Circle had mentioned, this is a song about Imogen, of chronicling her life in 7-year gaps and attributing to minutes of the song. And in that, it is autobiographical and it is her. It is an embodiment of her life, and the decision to go a cappella, I think, is very choice, as it allows the song to just be her. Not what she can play, but just her. And so it's a bleeding out of oneself and presenting it to the world in its entirety and also its singularity. And I just find it to be powerful to decide that that's going to be what the song is. I mean, this isn't even talking about what actually was done in the song, the musical components to it. This is just high level concept stuff. And already I find it to be just so well planned. And that doesn't even get into the music video itself, which is fascinating on multiple levels. First of all, it looks like it's done in one take. Um, there were maybe two places that I think could have been stitched, but at best, I think we're looking at 3 to 4-ish tops numbers of unique scenes. Um, but it's still going to be a massive undertaking to do this. But then you also have the sets and how this hallway has all of these individual scenes lined up that showcase the moments or eras of her life, you could say. Um, and it all comes together into this fascinating multimedia artwork. And then also, can we talk about like the forward thinking of the shot style, where she has this sped up but still in real time idea going on where everything looks really fast and rigid as if the footage has been sped up, but the lip syncing is still in line with the song itself. And this is something that is really big on TikTok today. And this was recorded, well, the video is at least 8 years old. I don't know about the song itself, but yeah, the fact that this style, and this could have also been influenced by something else at the time. This also could have been an influence for modern TikTokers. I have no idea, where all the lines are drawn here. It's all visual art at that moment, and that's outside of my expertise, but this feels way ahead of its time as far as telling it this way, because a lot of TikTok is self-expression and self-documentation. It feels a lot like an extrapolation of what this was into a different medium. But this was 8 years earlier. Just really fascinating on a lot of fronts there. Now, let's get back to my expertise though. Let's talk about the music. And I find this fascinating because the music simultaneously moves in opposing directions throughout the journey in different facets. I mean, let me explain this for a second, because it took me a while to catch on to this, and I thought it was really intriguing how it happened. At the beginning, our music is rather simple. It's not layered at all. We typically have one sound at a time. I'm pretty sure it is mostly monophonic. There might be a couple of polyphonic ideas, but it is primarily monophonic. Even when we have different sounds, like when she does the mouth pop thing, I actually don't know how to do that. How did she do that? Anyways, it was the last thing, I think, during her first minute. Um, but that wasn't layered under anything. It wasn't a percussive element to the melody. It was the melody. It's what was happening at the moment. Um, oh, there were hand claps though, weren't there? So there was a percussive section. It wasn't purely monophonic. Um, but yeah, so like the hand claps are very patty cake, very kids game kind of stuff. And her vocals are a bit higher pitched, very airy and breathy, kind of giving a childlike element to it. Really going for as cutesy as a sound, I think, as she can. And just simple music. But we're in 6/8, which isn't an unusual time signature, but it's not the standardized norm that is 4/4. I thought the whole song would be in 6/8 because the next couple of segments were also. And the thing about 6/8 is it can be kind of bouncy, it can be kind of flowy, it can be kind of rigid based on a lot of different patterns of rhythmic accentuation. So you can go with something a bit more waltzy. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that has a nice like flow to it. You can go for every other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's got a bounciness to it. But what was really interesting was, I think it was the third segment, we actually had, if I can remember this, we had an accent on 1 and on 3 and 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is juddery. It's not symmetrical like the other two, and it also leaves this pocket of unaccented stuff that has a flurry of accents before it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So on our first 4 beats, we have 3 accents. That is a lot of 75%, right? That's a majority of the notes being accented. And then our back half, though, is just 5 and 6, and they're not accented at all. So it has this feeling of rushing and dragging, and rushing and dragging. There's energy, and then there's not. There's direction, and then there's not. And so it feels lost a little bit. And we see this not a, I can't even call it an evolution, this shifting of accent patterns that I think are supposed to allude to the mindset of the of her at those ages, those eras. And and it's all done within the framework of 6/8. And I was talking about parallel but opposite ideas of complexity. We have this increasing complexity in the metric pattern. In the musical ideas, though, we are adding more and more and more layers. We're changing up the modes from strictly major to minor, to bringing in diminished ideas, and increasing the harmonic complexity. It's not just adding more voices and more layers and more notes and more sounds to give it a very full production, but the chords, the chord progressions, that are being utilized are more complex as well. We went from something rather simple and flowy to 2 eras later, a bit more darker, heavier, wider, and with a juddery type of flow to it where it's kind of difficult to keep up with the rhythmic pattern. But at this point, we actually shift away from the 6 and we move to a 5/8, I guess, unless we want to do a tempo change. Typically 5/4 would be more generally used, but given that the beat regularity doesn't change, I think we're still utilizing eighth notes as the beat, which is where the 8 on the bottom comes in. So we have 5/8 would be our time signature. But there are 5 beats per bar now. And so we're moving towards this idea of the standard 4/4. And as we do that, the music is continuing to get more complex. I'm curious to get into the lyrics to see if there is linguistic complexity, vocabulary complexity, even shifting to new rhyme schemes, shifting to complex rhyme schemes, or even moving away from that entirely. I know at one point we had spoken word. And we could also move to free poetry at that point. I don't remember if she was rhyming anymore or if there was a cadence to the syllabic flow. These are not things I typically look at when I'm listening to music because a lot of it has to do with the language side of the lyrics more so than the musical side. But these are things I think about sometime when I listen to music. And right now, unfortunately, I decided to think about them after the song was over. In a casual setting, I've just replayed the song. But we have a full video here to get through. It's gonna be a long one too, I think. So we're just gonna keep moving. Those are things that are on my mind though. Is how are the lyrics, the poetry of the lyrics, evolving alongside the music? But as we continue to add complexity to the music, as I stated, we're still shifting sounds, atmospheres. We have new timbres, even. It's all still a cappella and snaps and claps, only things that she can do with her body, I think. There are some things that I think are handled in post, though. Um, and this is something I want to save for a later topic. But just know if you've only made it this far, and for some reason you're not going to finish the video, I do recognize that it's not completely raw, natural acapella, or at least I don't think so. But anyways, we're adding these layers, we're adding harmonic complexity. We also have at occasion times 2 vocals going off at the same time, adding like a call and response thing going on, counterpoint. So we have all this complexity adding up, but our time signature is getting simpler and simpler until we end up on 4/4 to wrap the song up. And in fact, we even pushed that towards a pretty, what was it, 4 on the floor, or was it every other beat? Was it 1 and 3? Either way, it was just a very dancey style of 4/4, lots of energy, lots of forward drive. But the music didn't really go with that. The music had actually reached its darkest point. And it was sort of this conflict of happy bounciness with a seemingly darker atmosphere and a mixed set of positive and negative lyrics, if I remember right. As usual, I don't pay a lot of attention to the lyrics, but I did pick up some ideas here and there. And so we can also look at the emotional complexity here, where it isn't just about the kids are happy and carefree and the adults are dark and brooding, but actually looking at this as a flow from the naivety and innocence of childhood to a singular broodingness in possibly the teen years, and then the complexity of emotions in her final segment, where her life isn't just happy or sad or difficult or easy. It's a lot of things, and she tries to incorporate as many vibes into that as possible. And I think the reduction to the 4/4 time signature and simplifying that is possibly about adulthood attempting to find that calm, that home point, that as many stresses as we have going through our day, there's still something that we can find that is centering. And it's possible the time signature became that, or became to represent whatever that is for her, that regardless of any of the highs and lows that happened in her life, there's still that center. Um, and so we end up with a song that is exceptionally deep and nuanced, maybe more so than appears on the surface. And I think a lot of people will listen to this and recognize a, a movement from each era to the next, from each minute to the next. And they'll be able to recognize that things are changing, and probably even pick up on the complexity aspect of it. After all, we start with hand claps and a single vocal track, and then we move into full-bodied a cappella with harmony. I think anybody listening to it could pick that up, but there's a lot of nuance under the surface. I think that showcases an exceptionally mature angle to the composition here, and at least to me, it appears that Imogen wants to put a lot of information into this track, and a majority, I would say, is not on the surface, and I'm just completely enthralled by that. Imogen is I think we've checked her out before, right? No? She's been on a live stream then, right? Um, no. Well, how have I been sleeping on it? Oh, man. I'm gonna have to dig into more of her works. But anyways, I guess this is my introduction to her as an artist, and I am blown away, not just at the concept of it, but the execution and the depth of the execution. This is a song that I will probably put on repeat right after I turn this video off, because I feel like there's so much stuff I missed, and yet I feel like I picked up on a ton. I probably should have said that backwards. I picked up on a lot of stuff, and yet I feel there's so much left to grasp. Now, one of the other things I wanted to talk about is the production on this. There's quite a few sounds, especially once we hit the third minute, that sounded less natural to me. And the production seemed to emphasize having effects put on her vocals. At one point, I don't remember if it was the third or fourth minute in, Um, we had a B sound followed by humming, and it was supposed to emphasize the sharp attack, the nice round attack of a bass sound, followed by the resonant tone. And it was a bit of a lower pitch as well. It was supposed to replicate, a bass instrument. I think it works well for bass guitar. It's a pretty typical sound for a bass pitch in a synthesizer for a lot of music. Just a really nice round, warm, lower pitch tone. But there was a bit of extra distortion to it, maybe fuzz, in a way that actually sounded like was sped up in a similar manner that the video is. Regardless, though, it definitely has less of a natural sound to it. In this entire section, the more I listened to the non-melody section, and I listened to where she was singing the parts of what would be instruments in most other songs, I began to notice more and more digitalized elements of it, compression, hum, buzz, maybe even a little bit of distortion. Just parts to it that removed the humanity from it, and gave it a digital feel. And it made me think back to the beginning in the first section. The hand claps are very clear and close to raw. They're probably cleaned up a little bit to remove any ambient sound and to perfectly taper off uh, the sound itself. But generally, I don't think there's any additive elements to it. It's more about shaping the sounds than anything else, and applying EQ to it so it mixes well, stuff like that. The vocals also sound very close to natural, with that higher pitched falsetto with the cutesy edge to it. It feels like it's all stuff that she can create, nothing that needs to be applied after the fact in production. But the further we get into the track, the more artificial some of it starts to feel. And I wonder if that's supposed to showcase the idea of hiding the true self. Not so much of being fake or false, but kids are kind of pure id. they just they do what they want, right? It's not about societal norms or obeying rules. Especially, it's the first minute of the song is supposed to represent her first 7 years, and right and wrong kind of show up. Well, like 1 year old, 1.5 year old. I mean, they got to start. They have to learn how to understand language first, um, and then understand the concept of moral. I mean, it's a big thing through those opening years. So a lot of kids are just pure id. Whatever they want to do, they do. Um, Especially in the first couple of years. And there's no mask. What you see is who they are. It's their instinct. It's their wants and needs, their desires. As we get older, we have societal norms. We have social norms and social conventions, whether it's larger social groups or even smaller social groups. Even something as simple as different social media platforms. You might present yourself different because you have different fan bases, or the platform itself emphasizes specific aspects. Um, and everybody kind of has different masks for different situations, and it's rare to just be you, your unaltered desires. And so this shaping down of pure human to something less than, or in another way to say it, purely Imogen to something a bit more shaped and controlled and conformed, might be a way of showing how people tend to do this as they get older, and they have different roles and rules to conform to. Again, all while simplifying the rhythmic structure and time signature. There are a lot more rules as an adult. There's a lot more constraint as an adult, not just within the ideas of what you can and cannot do, generally speaking, but also what your options are and are not. A lot of people have to work, and thus you have to give up 8 hours of most of your days um, to do something. You no longer have a choice in that. If you don't work, you don't have food, you don't have a house, you can't support yourself or your family. And so some choices get made for you, and you get put into a box of who you are. And maybe that box isn't who you want to be. And this idea also of who am I is actually the last line of the song or something. Let me pull this up real quick. It was something like that. Okay, so the last line is who am I now? And see, there it is. We can see the evolution of the self through the years. They're all definitely Imogen, but they're all certainly different. There are similar strains throughout them, but each of these sections is quite different from the last. There is a thread where you can move through one to the next, and that's one of the things I really liked about this, and it makes a lot of sense, is that we don't have any harsh transitions. Everything feels smoothly moving from one idea to the next, which is how life works. Very rarely, except for maybe in your college days, will you wake up and not remember a block of your life. There's no time skips like in film. It's not, 10 years later. Most people don't have that. And I say most because it can happen. It does happen. The brain is an interesting thing. Um, but a majority of people are going to live their life smoothly moving from one moment to the next. Um, and I like that her music does that as well, but that it also changes in ways that feel natural but wholly distinct. And so the idea of who am I now, I think is interesting because it could look forward, right? Uh, Technically, it has been 7 years since this track, 8 at least, since the video was released. Um, if this is going to be continuative art, do we have a term for that? Art that gets added onto over time that never has a finished state? There would be another minute added to this by now. And I'm curious if that is part of the plan. But it'll be really interesting for her to say, "Who am I now?" and then find out who she is now, 7 years later. But I think it's also interesting to view that in the current idea of all of these moments of my life. They're all very distinct from each other. Who am I? The me who I am now is very different from the me who I was at the beginning of the song when I was an infant. In some ways, things have grown in complexity, and in other ways, things have simplified. In some ways, I'm freer now, and in other ways, I'm more confined. In some ways, I'm more myself, and in others, I'm less. Who am I now? And it really depends on how you say that, where the emphasis is in the sentence that can convey different ideas. And so I find it fascinating how it is both part of an element of self discovery and part of an element of wonder for the future. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to tie that back to the music because the music sort of just, the music doesn't go with that. The last thing we hear musically is the mixed emotion dancey, sad, positive thing we have at the end in the 4/4. But even there, I mean, we have the idea of simplicity in the time signature, simplicity in rhythmic structure, but complexity in emotional atmosphere, complexity in harmony. Um, so yeah, it's just there's so many facets to this song, and honestly, I think that's going to be the end of my musical analysis here. We'll touch on the lyrics, which I guess I kind of already started with the final phrase. Oh, but she says, "Who am I now?" And then we have a lot of voices that say, "Who am I now?" So there is a musical kind. Yeah, we can call that a musical component. I'm not going to say it's really hard in the music aspect, but it certainly is outside of the scope of the lyrics, which are just the words on paper. This is how the words are presented, which I kind of view as part of the musical component, but I don't know what to make of that. I mean, is that supposed to be all of her selves, all of her eras coming together and, after every month, year, 7 years, decade, uh, you know, quarter of a century, asking, "Who am I now?" Is it the feeling that we change all the time and wonder who we are, or is it the idea that I'm curious who I will be tomorrow, whether tomorrow is the next day or the next month or the next year? Again, there is that diversity of phrasing where it can mean a couple of different things here. Or was it a collective? Was it more than Imogen? I don't know. The whole song is exclusively her, but now that I'm thinking about it, was there a male voice in there? I don't know. There was a lot of sounds, and it has now been like 30 minutes since I've heard the song, since I've heard that moment. So the memory's fading a bit on it. I don't know. I'd have to go back and hear that one to, I think, have a better read on what the intentions were there. So yeah, like I said, let's hit some lyrics. There's 14 verses here, so uh, it's going to take me a moment to read. It's just going to be a second of your time, and before you know it, we're going to be starting lyrics, lyrics, lyrics. So many of them. All right, so I'm trying to piece together which verses belong to which eras. I think I have a pretty good idea of it. But there are some areas where things bleed over a little bit, and that makes sense because while technically the song is supposed to be breaking up 7 year groups to each minute, it makes sense that the back half of each era is going to be similar to the front half of the next era because ages 7 and 8 are going to be similar as are 14 and 15. There's not going to be a lot of change there, at least not the type of change that's going to be between 0 and 7, or I guess it'd be, yeah, whatever, and 8 and 14. So I'm curious if the music actually does that. I remember feeling the music in these 1 minute moments, but I wonder if there were more crossover elements where the small buildup over the era actually had elements that bled into the next minute's worth of music, which created that smooth transition because time isn't rigid, even though we have these larger jumps in musical themes, maybe some of the minutiae is still similar. Anyways, I'm starting to see some of that in the lyrics as each verse is a bit more complex than the last one, even if they are telling similar things. So, like, verse 1 is very much told from the perspective of a newborn. It just says, "Cat, blue, piano are just some of the things I like. The more I see of them in my day, the better I sleep at night." It has a nice rhyme. It has a nice rhythmic flow. It feels like a nursery rhyme. Um, and it's pretty simplistic, even just starting off with single words. Verse 2 does the same, but we look at instead of things, we look at people. She talks about people in her family and how the more of them she can get in her day, the better she sleeps at night. Very childlike, right? You keep similar aspects in each verse. Fits well with the idea of the nursery rhyme, makes it easier for kids to remember and sing along, helps with vocabulary and speaking skills. Like there's a whole psychology that goes into why children's songs are the way they are. And this perfectly embodies that. Even moving to our third verse, which is our last one in our first 7 years, we have a little bit more complexity to it, but there's similar elements. It says, I can moonwalk, build castles, play ping pong, talk to animals, hold my breath for a really long time until the future are just six of the things I can do, and the more I can fit of these things in my day, the better I sleep at night. So we've ditched the rhyme scheme. We're now exploring words. And it almost feels as if this is more her thoughts, her stream of consciousness, rather than a nursery rhyme that she's repeating, right? The rhyme scheme's gone, the rhythmic cadence is gone, but the concept is still there. Name a bunch of things I like, and the more I can have them in a day, the better I'll sleep at night. But the things she can do are more complex. Moonwalk and play ping pong and hold my breath for a really long time. They're still childlike, but they're more complex than I like these people and I like blue. But there's also a larger vocabulary aspect here, which I think is interesting. From here we move to verse 4, which I believe is the start of the second era, the second set of 7 years. And we begin to see her days at school. There's teasing. I mean, well, actually, maybe not the days at school. There's two things going on here. The first verse of this, verse 4, actually, says, composer or an astronaut is what I want to be when I grow up. I know because I can sing out all through the day and I fly through space by night. So, a little bit of her aspirations. You know, a lot of kids get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? This is something that kids are just asked all the time through school. I, in retrospect, I don't really get it. I mean, I guess it helps with maybe self-actualization or even future planning, but I don't think I know anybody who's doing what they said they wanted to do when they were 5. I'm certainly not, primarily because I hated music. I remember taking music class as our it's like an art, it's kind of art block. In elementary school, though, we would have a rotating thing, and every day we would either do PE, which was like the odd one out, or music, drama, and drawing. And I remember, I think I've told this story on the channel even. I remember us learning having to learn recorders in music class and playing hot cross buns, and me looking at my best friend at the time was like, I don't know why we have to learn this. It's so dumb. I'm never gonna need this anytime in my life. Oh man. So yeah, I don't know, that's a little aside. If anybody has a psychology into that though, like I'm interested in it. I'm sure it helps kids somehow, or we probably wouldn't do it. But it seems so prolific to childhood upbringing is asking kids what they want to do when they grow up. Interestingly, the next verse is um, sort of nightmarish. Says the teasing, the fighting, the hospitals. I don't want to go anymore. I put on a brave face and battle through the day, but I might cry myself to sleep. So it seems that she's not fitting in at school. But I don't know what's up with the hospitals. Is there something about, because I don't know anything about Imogen's as a person. In fact, I'm just learning about her as an artist today. So I don't know if she had a medical history, especially in her childhood, that she would have been in and out of hospitals. But yeah, just not having a great time. And this comes right after all of this really upbeat bouncy, childhood naivety stuff, which is real rough. Verse 6 and 7 shift to a different style in which we have a background vocal that intersperses a couple of lines throughout the main vocal set. The background says, I need more, and then there's two lines sung by the main vocals, and then it says gadgets or, and then the next one says pocket money. So I need more gadgets or pocket money. And this is something that happens in both of these verses. What is said in the main vocals seems to just be general school vibes. Dancing around the car park after lunch, copycats, gold stars, cola cubes for good marks. I'm a shy type, but I try to show off. There's a popular blonde girl that all the pretty girls sit with. We swap stickers and we're best friends. We're sisters at school. So she's talking about, general school life. Yeah, so this just feels very 90s to me. I don't know if this verse was specifically about her in the 90s. I don't know how old she is. But yeah, that's what it's reminding me of, though. So then we get to verse 8, and that seems to be, once again, about being made fun of, particularly even at school. She had an embarrassing incident one time that she'll never live down, and so she hides in bushes and tiptoes around corners and stuff like that. She even asked right at the beginning, why do you hate me so much? Is it the clothes that I wear? Is it the way that I speak? So I think she just had a real tough time fitting in with a lot of schools, and she had one really good friend at one point in her life, but I don't think we see any more of that. There's only a few more verses now. And interestingly, verse 9 and 10, this definitely has to be the teenage phase. It is completely focused on romance. Verse 9, I never want this to end. The night, the music with you in my arms. I mean, it's almost bordering on the cliche there as far as teen love songs go. But then verse 10, bordering on the cliche again. I found the place and it feels like home, but I caught you kissing her and suddenly I'm on my own. Like, yep. I fell in love with you and I don't ever want this to end. And I know what real love is like now, even though I'm only 15. And you cheated on me. Like, this is just teen love songs in a nutshell. But then we get to verse 11, which feels still with one foot in the past and one foot for the future. Interesting. I didn't mean to make this connection, but the phrase finding my feet pops up every other line here. And it's about coming into your own. And it's actually hyper repetitive. This feels a lot like pop music in the past 10 years or so, with really simple, catchy choruses that are supposed to be hyper repetitive in a way that gets stuck in your head. There's really only two lines here. We have finding my feet, make love, make money, make a difference. Finding my feet, connect, connect. Finding my feet, make love, make money, make a difference. How did you do that? Connect, connect. So there's one change in here, but most of it is just hyper repetitive stuff. Verse 12 is the beginning of the really dark phase, and it's where the spoken word comes in. It says, I find myself gazing out of the window for no reason. When did I stop eating bread and cheese? I love cheese. I want to have children, but I don't want to have children, And I mean, this speaks to a lot of stuff. There is now a hyper focus on the self, right? And dieting. You stop eating bread because of the carbs or the gluten or whatever. Cheese is the same way, except for different. I don't know why cheese is always kind of ruled out. I mean, it's dairy, but maybe it's mostly empty calories. Maybe there's better ways to get that calcium or the vitamin D. Uh, I don't know. I'm not a dietitian. I was gonna say a diet expert, but we have a word for that. And focused on the future as well. I want to have children, but I don't want to have children, and like all these dilemmas of adulthood. It's no longer just about, finding love or just trying to get through school or just trying to make ends meet, which I think is what verse 11 was about making money, finding your feet, that moment between, well, I'm going to say teenage years and adulthood, but I'm going to kind of encompass like the early 20s into those teenage years as well, where you're still trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing and how to be an adult. 18 is typically seen as an adult, at least in the US legally, but I think at 18, most people still don't know what they're doing with their lives. Um, so that's still part of that transition to becoming an adult. And we can kind of see some of that in verse 11. We get here, though, says, well, also introspection. I find myself gazing out of the window for no reason. There just seems to be a lot of concentration and energy put into understanding things here, which feels very adult. But 13 introduces some of that negativity. There's a feeling I can't explain, online, offline, like I'm not even really here, awake or sleep. How do I tell the difference? This idea of getting into a rut, being on autopilot through your life. Um, could even be looking at meaningless distractions like social media with the online, offline, I'm not really here kind of idea. Finding out that what I was talking about actually of having to put yourself into boxes. You don't really have choices anymore. You wake up, you do your job, which your job would be, making music, or is she a big pop star? Because like pop stars do a lot of work outside of music as well. They got music video shoots like this. I mean, this could have been an all day deal right here. This was not a small production, as I stated, and they went for that seamlessly one shot style as well. So I mean, this was a huge endeavor outside of making music, but then you also have photo shoots and publicity stuff. I don't know how big of a star she is, where she would have to do all of this stuff, but um, yeah, I mean, you go in, you do your job, you come home, you get on your phone, you scroll a bit, maybe you watch an episode or two of the latest hit TV show or movie, and then you go to bed, and that's your life. No matter how glamorous your life is, how much money you have, how big of a mansion you have, you can easily fall into these routines where you sleepwalk through life. There's going to be moments of joy. I'm sure she still finds a lot of excitement in the music creation process, but it's possible other aspects are less interesting. She's on autopilot form. Well, she asks, how can I tell between being awake and asleep? Verse 14, I think, is interesting because then it shows the end of this journey, or at least where she is at the moment. Um, the final lines right before she says, "Who am I now?" is, I've got to toughen up because I'm breaking it all apart. What's at the heart of it all? And it almost feels like we're continuing on with some of these existential crises from verse 13 of not really understanding what the point of it is. Maybe even particularly looking at her art. Maybe for a moment she kind of got chewed up by the music industry and became a bit more to a point where she was phoning it in. Maybe her heart wasn't in the music. She says, what's at the heart of it all? But if you look at music that you made without heart, you would find that there's nothing at its core. And maybe she did reach a point where some of her stuff she feels was a bit too commercialized. It was a song to be a song or a song to be a radio hit and not something she felt was art. Again, I don't know anything about Imogen. This is my first song I've heard from her. I'm just presenting things that I'm thinking might be possibilities based on my experience and experience of other people's lives, especially artists who I know, how they went about their art and some of the phases that they've been through. Um, But yeah, so there's definitely this disenchantment, this disillusionment in her current era, which again is now a minute old. If we look at the song the way that it's built, I'm really curious to see if she makes an addition to this. If not now, then maybe in another 6 or 7 years when she can put 2 more minutes on the song in a way that this can be living art. Is that the term for it? Art that never is finished. It continuously grows over time. That would be what I would call it. I don't know why I didn't think of that phrase earlier. But and once again, right? The lyrics are shifting in complexity. We move around through a lot of different rhythmic cadences. We move around through different rhyme schemes. We move around from, well, we even go into full spoken word, right? And the lyrical topics also grow more complex and move from the within to the without, back to the within. However, the second time that we come back to the self, it's more introspective, asking questions about the way things are and have a more profound outlook on the self than at the beginning, which was just these are things about me and I like these things. And I think that's really interesting, but also very relatable. I think a lot of people look for that external validation in their teenage years, especially with puberty and hormones and developing feelings for people and going through your first romances and relationships and stuff like that. External forces become very important. And as you grow older, I think there's a tendency to return back to the self in some ways, but with the wisdom and maturity that allows you to focus on a more profound element of the self than just what I want and what I need and who I am. In fact, in this case, there's even a reading that she doesn't really know who she is at this point, and there's more to learn about herself. Which actually ties in both of the readings of who am I now into a single reading of both looking at the self now and the self in the future. Beautiful song though. Yeah, let's wrap this up because I just made a 1 hour video about a 5 minute song. So I think this is the biggest ratio ever on the channel for song length to analysis length. Um, but there's just so much here, and like I said, I feel like I've only scratched the surface. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Imogen Heap's The Listening Chair. Let me know what you thought of this track. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you'd like to expand upon, anything that you have your own perspective on, or maybe something I was wrong about. Yeah, any of that. Let me know in the comment section. Above the comments in the description box is a link to Linktree. In there, takes you to this menu right here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to my Discord server, listen to my music, all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.